Welcome to the Get Real About Safety podcast. In our podcast, we discuss the new view of safety, what works and what doesn't work, to break down old paradigms and help you improve safety performance in your organization. Hi, I'm Mike.
And I'm Pam, and we appreciate you listening. Please share and subscribe and tell others about this podcast. You can find us on most podcast platforms and also on YouTube. Good morning and welcome to the PROSAFE podcast. And we are talking today about what makes a rigger a qualified. And I've got two great folks joining me here. I've got Sam Socolow. Am I pronouncing that right, Sam?
I've been called worse, but Socolow.
Socolow. I mess that up every time.
That's
all right, Sam Socolow and Philip Greisen. So Sam, you want to start and introduce yourself and who you are and who you work for and what you do, and also a little about your rigging experience.
My rigging experience. That's always a good one. People ask me that all the time. How'd you get into doing what you do? I'm not quite sure. So my name's Sam Socolow. I'm the product application manager, recently promoted to director of operations over all Ashley Sling. I've been in the business approximately 25 years. I've worked for 4 different rigging manufacturing companies. When people do ask me the question, how did you get into this? I always refer back to my childhood years where I used to rock climb up on Lookout Mountain and Spelunk. And I met up with a Navy SEAL and a Ranger who taught me how to professionally rock climb. So I guess I've always just had a fascination with rigging, tying knots in general.
Awesome.
And then when I left college, I went into steel fabrication. So I used to build structural steel and conveyor systems in a factory and eventually did installations in the field. So I know a teeny bit about rigging. I don't know everything about rigging, that's for sure.
Well, you know a lot more than anybody I know personally, so that's
I appreciate that. I try real hard.
So, Philip, I'll let you formally introduce yourself. Of course, you are my son, for those that are in the know out there.
That's right. I feel for Sam because most people call me Philip Greisen and it's Greisen. So I feel you, Sam. They're weird last names, right? People struggle with
You
them.
get used to it. I'm not sensitive.
That's right. That's right. So Philip Greisen, been with PROSAFE for a little over 20 years now in the construction training and consulting business. And so, of course, things like rigging and signal person training come up a good bit today. But like Pam and Mike, my mom and Mike really embrace human error philosophy, and that we all are prone to make mistakes, and it's actually just natural. And of course, that applies to the subject we're going to talk about today.
Yes, it does.
And might even throw in a little bit of, study a lot of behavior, sometimes from the leadership standpoint, but sometimes from the self-improvement standpoint. And I think some of those things kind of apply to rigging as well. And so we might get into some of those conversations.
Well, it definitely does, because we're going to touch on the issue of leadership and rigging, and go ahead and refer to your website and your kind of passion.
So have leaderthink.com, and there's a podcast on there. It's available on all major platforms, Apple and Stitcher and all of that, but really embrace the leadership side of it. And the reason is that no matter how good the science, it's only as good as the leadership that supports it. And I've said many times that, when I started, it was all behavior-based safety. And although we still have some of those components we use today, now it's human error and human operating philosophy. But whatever great science we give people in our safety community, it's still only as effective as the leadership that supports it. So that's my passion.
And you did not mention also, though, that your rigging training also was, I think Sam was the inspiration for your master rigging training class that you took. Didn't he refer you to that?
Amen. Yeah, no, it said, Sam, I'm paraphrasing, and correct me if I'm wrong. I know our memories are flawed, but I think I asked you, what is the absolute best rigging class that I could go to learn more? And you referred me to ITI, and my experience was he is right. And it was really one of the greatest experiences I ever had, because it was so hands-on that, paraphrasing, it was a week-long class, but each day started with some classroom training, doing a lot of math, right? That's part of rigging, going over concepts. And then we go out in the field and do what we learned for real, with real cranes and real rigging. And, a highlight of that moment that stands out was calculating load weight. And the instructor taught us how we calculate unknown load weights. And then he sent us out to the field, and there was this, big industrial piece of equipment. And he said, okay, there you go. Figure out what it weighs. You can use whatever rigging you want. Get the crane, move it over there, and don't kill anybody. And then he said, bye. And he walked away. And it was a great experience, So I know the operator wouldn't have let us kill anybody, the operator in the crane, but
Right.
but that kind of stuff was awesome
I
training.
bet you he was smiling real big, though.
Yeah, he was.
Well, I remember you calling me from the class and with some frustration in your voice that you had ruined every pair of khaki pants you had brought up there.
You went to rigging school in khakis?
Khakis,
Well,
yes.
That's all right. Souvenirs.
No, but that's a true statement. I was fresh. Okay, so they made you work hard, and
I'm sweating.
I've made this terrible joke that a lot of times safety training is you get your card if you have a pulse, right? If you show up to the class, here's your card because you sat in a chair all day, and that guy made us work, and that was the misconception of, what is our traditional safety training? We go sit in a room all day, and we joke around with don a harness or something like that, but I ruined all my khakis that week. I was unprepared, but it was great training. I think it's what we should be doing.
Well, I think that's
agree.
That's a good segue. I want to segue into how this podcast came to be and get into the meat of it a little bit. I have used Sam as my go-to person to call and be frustrated about rigging problems I observe on job sites. So over the years, with general contractors or subcontractors, it seems like I'm always either, making observations on a job site that are horrific, or it's post-incident. Now all of a sudden everybody's worried about their riggers, and I call Sam. And so I had sent Sam an email recently with some questions and some frustrations about the problem of having what Philip just referred to as having a card in your wallet. And that not making you a rigger. And Sam responded back with a bit of a rant of his own. And I loved it. So you want to give me a quick summary of that rant and what you have been seeing over the years?
I knew I should have read over that email before we did this, but I pretty much know it in gist. I mean,
know it.
First of all, there's a lot of people out there that have cards, and the card doesn't necessarily make you qualified. In fact, my friends that I sit on council with, some of my friends, I sit on the Web Sling and Tie Down Association's 3 technical committees. Some of the people that sit there also sit on the ANSI committees. One of my acquaintances actually sits on the NCCCO board, advisory board, and we all talk about qualified versus certified even. A card doesn't make you qualified. Even a certified card doesn't make you qualified. The question is what are you qualified at? So when I'm teaching class, one of the first things I tell the folks that are in the qualified classes, know what you're qualified at, know what you're not qualified at. A card doesn't necessarily make you qualified. In fact, when we were doing a lot of training out at the Plant Vogtle nuclear project, they decided that they wanted all the riggers who had qualified cards from their union halls to go through my class, a basic fundamental class with some basic questions, just to make sure, they had the fundamentals. And unfortunately, there was probably 10 to 15% failure rate. Now typically we have a better pass rate from people that come from like a union, because there's apprenticeship programs. There's a lot of training involved. Right. When we get into the general contracting end, like here in downtown Atlanta, a lot of these folks aren't unions. There were no apprenticeship programs. So my failure rate for my classes are probably jump up sometimes 20%. 30%. I've had some classes where I fell over 60% of the students. I mean, we have a firm belief that everybody isn't made to be a rigger, and some folks that just shouldn't be their vocation.
And that is so scary when you think about driving in downtown Atlanta with all the tower cranes swinging loads all over the place, and to think about what kind of failure rate you have for the people that rig those loads. That's just downright scary.
Right. And then, of course, I'm sure just like you folks will contact me, and some folks don't like the idea that I failed folks. And I'm sorry, but just because you have a pulse, you don't get a card. I mean, obviously, if we're just handing out cards, people can get seriously injured, and that's not my intent. So we hold the line pretty hard on that. And, I think the course is fairly easy because it's open book and all you have to do is answer questions. But just, some people are good at math, some people are good at English, some people are good at rigging, some people aren't.
Exactly. We have seen this big influx of cards since the construction crane standard was revised and came into effect. And Philip, you want to give a quick summary of what's in that standard and how that kind of drove people to everybody having a card now?
Yeah, I'm going to give OSHA some credit which don't always do, right? I think when we start, since I've been here 20 years in this industry, I didn't see near as much rigor training going on as we have in the past 10 years.
Right.
And I do think that crane standard, it did motivate that, that we started looking at that more. And I think that's a good thing. That's a good thing that we are starting to train people on the on rigging, because I think people have been rigging loads this whole time. We're just getting better at starting to train. And so that it's not perfect, right? And we're having a conversation that's not perfect, but I am happy that we're on the path with it. And so, the citations we see each year in the crane standard are pretty small compared to things like ladder use and that kind of stuff, but it has gained attention. And so now we're doing it, which is good, right? That is a good thing. If you want a summary, okay, so we have to have a qualified rigger for assembly, disassembly, and when we will have people within the fall zone of a load, right? And so we have to have a qualified rigger. And one of the biggest frustrations, I think, is when you look at what the standard says, a qualified rigger is a rigger that meets the criteria for a qualified person. Now, what the heck does that mean?
Exactly.
Right? And so if you whittle that away, that definition, I don't think we're sending anybody to college to get a bachelor's degree in rigging. So that is not going to fit this definition. I do think the or in that qualified person definition, professional standing, maybe certification, but training and experience. That I think that matters for our conversation, because we're talking about training, but training alone is not it, right? Experience matters as well. And then on top of that, if you look at the compliance directive, the compliance directive clearly states that experience alone does not qualify you. And if you tie it back to the definition, there's an and there. It's training and experience, right? But I think we could flip it around, that training alone doesn't qualify you either. Both are important, right?
Yes.
I agree. Absolutely.
Was
So
Sammy,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, but just continue the conversation on this. What is enough training? What is good training?
You asking Sam, or you?
Ongoing training, right? I don't think there's ever enough training. I'm still learning, right?
That's right. Totally. Okay, so Sam, listen. Okay, we're going down that path, so I want to go to it, and I want your thoughts as well. Okay, and Sam, I think of you as a real friend, and a real friend is somebody who will call me out on my BS. Okay, and
yeah, I would do that definitely for you.
That's right. and you do challenge me sometimes, and that's why I consider you a real friend. A real friend wouldn't do that, right? I mean, a non-friend wouldn't do that. So feel free to challenge anything I'm going to say. In my eyes, when I look around the world, there's There's some people go level 1, level 2. Some people say journeyman master. I've even seen level 1, level 2, level 3. And so there are different entities that have different definitions out there, right? And so I'm going to use a certain entity's definition of a level 1. And one thing that's in there is that a qualified person works under the supervision of a competent person. And to me, that means something, that even though we put you through the class and you have training and experience, you still have a mentor to go to when you have problems. And I think that's important, isn't it? The card doesn't make you qualified. I still need to have experience, and I need to have somebody to go to when I have problems, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but then the challenge a little bit too, I mean, if we're realistic about it, is that another thing in that certain entity's definition that I'm thinking of, that you are not required to calculate load weight, right? The load is provided. The load weight, center of gravity, configuration, and rigging are provided to you. And so a lot of times I'm telling people, hey, do you ever have to calculate load weight? And they're like, oh, no, we never have to do that. Okay. Hey, have you ever had to pick up a Connex box with a bunch of stuff in it? Well, yeah. That's calculating load weight. How about a skip pan full of a bunch of stuff? Yeah. That's calculating load weight, right? Okay. Well, you need the ITI Master Rigger course for $1,800 a person. Can you do something in a day? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is true in our world today. So what do you think about all that, Sam?
Well, I think there's some pretty large extremes there. A lot of folks out there just want the quickest course possible. Some people try to tell me, can you do it in 4 hours? Can you do it in 3 hours? I personally think 1 day is not enough. I wish everybody could be a master rigger and go to a week-long school. We know that that's probably not plausible or going to happen. But continuing education is extremely important. That a rigger doesn't understand how to do any calculations of load weight, have a true understanding of center of gravity, I believe that should be level 1 rigging. If you don't understand those basic fundamentals, how can you understand the rest of them? That's why people ask me what is my basic class. I always say, well, it's a level 1, level 2, because I actually teach you tension factors, reduction factors, and, we highlight center of gravity and just give them some real basic concepts. I'm not asking them to figure it all out, but at least grasp the concept. And some of these organizations that give you these certified cards, their level 1 to me just isn't even adequate. So I think that's where you were going.
So we hear the term best practice all the time in the industry. And if you were to define what you believe would be a best practice minimal amount of training for someone who's going to rig a load, what would that look like?
Well, they definitely need to have some type of professional training. This isn't something where the foreman or somebody just told them what they learned from somebody else. This is going to a professional class, something like you folks would do, or I would do, or any major, accredited agency might do. That's just to make sure they have the fundamentals. Second to that is actually hands-on training specific to their job. Like the standard says, they have to be qualified to do the rigging work at hand. So I tell folks, if all you're doing is flying 2x4s and lumber, we just have to get you qualified for that. But what we need to make a clear distinction on is that gentleman is only qualified to do that particular work. He may not be qualified maybe to fly the drill rig that's behind me, or to lift nuclear fuel rods, or to just working out of his area of expertise. Nobody knows everything about rigging, including myself. And the definition of a true qualified person is knowing when you're not qualified. So training should be continuing and ongoing. For
One
sure.
of the
So Sam,
go ahead, Philip.
You said something I think really important, is knowing when you're not qualified, and going back to that definition of qualified person, the most important part is, can you solve problems related to the work, right? And can you solve problems related to sling tension, four-legged bridles, and things that might be out of our expertise. And so if we can't solve that problem, we're not qualified for that particular rigging. And context is everything. So we're talking about this stuff. Rigging, if I tie back to what the directive says, and here's what they're telling the compliance officers, that rigging ranges from the simple to the complex, right?
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, there's various levels of what someone needs training in based on the type of rigging they do. And I think you and I had a conversation one time, Sam, about if I'm just a drywall guy and all I do in my life is pick up pallets of drywall, then that's pretty simplistic rigging. Now, I still need to know sling tension and all those kinds of things. But if I'm also picking up scissor lifts, that changes things, doesn't it?
Big time.
And so, what are we looking at? What is it you do? You need to be trained in that. And that's what's hard to define with this conversation, because there's not a one size fits all in our industry, especially if Sam or I have a bunch of different subs in the room, right? The mechanical guy, the steel erector, and the drywall guy are not rigging the same stuff. And I think that makes it difficult for us to do the laser focused quality job based on what you do, right? But in perfect world, we would probably more isolate people based on the type of rigging they do and ultra focus on that.
I completely agree. Obviously, the training has to be appropriate for the people and the type of work they're doing. And when you mix the room up, you have to be more generalized rather than, like you said, laser focused on particular subjects or things that are going to be critical to that particular type of trade.
One of the things that I have recommended all along, and I wish I could see happening out there, though, is that once someone has gone to this training class and they're out on the site, that the employer do that evaluation, and we just don't see that. But you can't, just because they have the card, unless you're actually going out and formally evaluating them in the workplace doing their tasks, how do you know that they learned what they need to know?
I think that's a great point. How often do they go out there? And sometimes in my class I bring up, had some incidents where an OSHA person would walk up to somebody and say, "Who's the qualified rigger?" And then, okay, what's the capacity of your rigging in that configuration?
And they can't answer.
And they can't answer. And then I always challenge people. They start worrying. Well, I can't. This is a lot of technical information. I'm like, typically, what Philip was saying, you have job specific tasks. If you're a drywall guy or you're an iron worker, I challenge any trade. I'll tell them, you probably only use about 6 or 8 different pieces of rigging on a regular basis. Now they might change in length, but you're going to use 2-inch straps, 3-inch straps, 4-inch straps, typically all 2-ply. It's rare that we see 1-inch straps out on the site. So, and then you're going to use wire rope slings. Typically on most construction sites are going to be starting at 1/2 inch, 5/8, 3/4, usually nothing over 1 inch unless we're making a big lift. So I challenge my folks to actually sit down and create their own cheat charts. Hey, if I pull 2 4-inch web slings and I configure them in a 6-degree triangle, what's my capacity? This is a thought process that can happen and after hours or in training classes. Somebody needs to analyze what they do on a regular basis in each process. I do know some of the larger contractors will say, hey, if you're flying a skip pan, this is the way we want you to fly. If you fly lumber, drywall, this is the way we expect you. So establishing company procedures is critical, but also just walking up to people and evaluating them. Hey man, what's the capacity of your rigging? What type of rigging angle do you think you have there? Those would be great leading questions. And I'm going to circle back to what Philip said. The last 10 years has been great, because before the last 10 years, the only time I did training was after an accident. Right. So now we're actually training them before the accident, which, is a lot better scenario. So
there's some really great things you just said there. One, the having a check sheet that, I'm going to later on we'll talk about human performance and human error as it ties into rigging. And that's something that's what we call an HP tool. It's a human performance tool because people will forget. So having a cheat sheet, and having yeah, exactly,
Indeed.
procedures and written procedures is a critical thing. The other thing I just have to follow up on is I love that idea of here's some questions to ask when you're out in the field, because what concerns me is that I see we have jobs now that have 20 to 40 safety people on the job. And yet any one of the three of us can walk out on that job and within minutes see something wrong with a rigging scenario or rigging equipment. How are we missing that? How is that? I think that our auditing process of the jobs is great when it comes to PPE and guardrails, but we miss things like this. If we're not asking those questions, we're not delving into that. So I really like that. And then the other thing, though, is that I'd like to ask either one of you your opinions on when it comes to auditing the job site, and I'm huge on auditing. You have to audit the heck out of everything or things will drift, right? So does our management, if the people that are getting trained are the riggers, are our safety professionals, our supervisors, and our senior management educated at least enough so that when they're out on the job, they could see something that's glaringly wrong? Because right now, I'm not sure that's true. Thoughts from either of you?
No, you're absolutely right. One of the things they did out of the Plant Vogel project when I went out there is Southern Company put every site observer, I guess safety person, these are people that just stood around watching,
Right.
and they put every one of them through one of my classes. I'm seeing more of that on the superintendent level. A lot of the larger general contractors are sending the superintendents and a lot of the safety folks. I don't do training quite as much as most. We're not a training company, we're a rigging manufacturing company.
Right.
But I find the large majority of people that are coming to me these days are they're sending in groups of superintendents and groups of safety people, which I just think is great.
That's fabulous.
Not only can they spot a problem, but a lot of these folks are able to help solve the problem. Isn't that the biggest part of being in safety? Isn't just say you're doing it wrong, but have corrective action to help them do it right. We don't want to just shut down the job. We want to make things better.
Very good. Philip, you have any follow-up to that?
I think Sam nailed it there. And I'm seeing more safety people attending some of those classes, which is good. And just like we've said multiple times, we're in that 10-year span of generating more awareness, right? I did want to circle back to something, and I know we've had this conversation before about equipping versus developing. And Sam said ongoing training is needed, which is true. That I forget the number, but the United States of America spends billions of dollars on check the box one and done training every year. And being a trainer and knowing we're what a 15% retention rate like a week later, that they're forgetting that. So where's the development piece? And it would be good to, from a training perspective and a human performance perspective, to do a little bit more development and to see that is how our brains work. That the class, no matter how, even the ITI class, I don't remember more than 15% of what I learned, right? That are we developing our people? And if we tie that back to the OSHA thing, or not the OSHA thing, but that basic level 1 rigger worked under the supervision of a competent person, right? Do they have a mentor? Right? Do they have a mentor to mentor them when they forget that 0.866 reduction factor or whatever we throw at them in the class? They are going to forget.
Well, that kind of makes me come back to that comment of yours of the competent person and the mentor. And I'm visualizing in Pam's perfect world that every job would have that at least one competent person in rigging who had a master rigging qualification or certification.
I agree.
And that that would just be something you just did as part of your requirements for rigging procedures. You have that expertise available on every job site.
Definitely. So, do we have somebody to go to? Sam, you said something that not everybody is meant to be a qualified rigger, and I think that's a true statement, right? And we have this culture and construction of everybody goes through the class and everybody gets it. Well, yeah, we want a bunch of people with basic knowledge of rigging, but like you just said, should there be some people that we invest in more? And I think the answer is yes, that it would be good to have some people go through the ITI class or the more advanced level training so we can have mentors out there. But this whole idea of everybody goes to the same class, yeah, everybody's got to wear a hard hat, but that kind of thinking, I don't think works for this subject matter. We need to pick and
I
choose
concur.
a little bit.
Could we talk a little bit about the problem for general contractors? And I feel their pain to some extent here is that what's become the norm, at least here in the Southeast, is that the general contractors verify that subcontractors have a card and then they get a red vest. I mean, that's happening, not at the plant. Yeah, that is happening. What would a better process look like?
I personally think that they should have some type of a test, just like we were doing out at the Plant Vogel nuclear project. I would think that whoever they're claiming is qualified should come in. They should have a basic skills test. It doesn't have to be 15 pages in 8 hours. You could literally give them a 2-page test that would take them less than an hour and just see if they understand the fundamentals of rigging. And then I think there should be some type of evaluation in the field.
Yes.
Somebody needs to walk out there from the general contractor side and say, hey, what's the capacity of your rigging? And hey, you're inspecting that sling. What are you inspecting it for? And there's some clear signs, just like when you go to a job site, and if it's disorganized and dirty, you can just feel there accidents happen. We know that's a cause of accidents. It just, if they're not even organized, everything's disorganized. That's just the surface of the iceberg usually. So, and then you being safety for professionals like me, I can tell when I'm on a site and I'm like, uh-oh. I can just look around the site and go, this is dangerous. I need to be very, very careful. I think the way people treat their rigging and handle their rigging tell you a lot about the actual rigger. If I walk out and the guy's throwing his slings around, they're keeping them in the mud, they're not treating them like a tool that can literally make them or break them or hurt or kill somebody. I mean, it's literally one of the most important tools on a job site, just seeing how people treat their rigging. And I always teach in my classes that I can tell by the way you treat your rigging. If you go out and meet with the best riggers in the world, they truly take care of their slings like their job depends on it. People's lives depend on it, and it's obvious. In fact, they won't even let you a lot of times. If you walk up and try to grab their sling, they'll be no, you ain't touching my sling. They take ownership of it. And when you walk out on these jobs and the rigging's just thrown all over the place and it's in the mud, and I mean, to me that immediately screams rigging training. We're gonna have an incident here.
Well, that's a perfect segue, because I think that was one of the things I had in my email, that I'd asked you for some photographs of rigging racks, and right. that was a huge hot button of mine, not just from a safety standpoint, but it's critical. If everything you said, if you're seeing the rigging laying in the dirt, you have a problem. And the use of rigging racks, to me, ought to be something we absolutely require. And I had mentioned, I think, too, the time study I saw. So when we try to separate these problems out into safety, and their safety, their production, and their quality, because the time study I'd seen showed the tremendous amount of production improvement by the use of a rigging rack versus having to go hunt for your rigging all over the job site. So you take that and the fact that rigging, that rigging's expensive, isn't it, Sam?
It can be, yes. It can be.
It's expensive.
Yeah.
So it shocks me that we have supervision or management walk by rigging laying in the mud, knowing that we're throwing money in the mud, beyond the safety issue. So I think that just falls into what you're saying about storage, not just storage from safety standpoint, from the ability for someone to be able to select the proper sling. If they've got to go hunt in the mud for a sling, they're likely to pick up one that's not the appropriate sling just because it's the first one they can get their hands on. And by using the rack, that gives them the ability to better see and identify damage. And then obviously, back to that money factor, it increases the life of the sling. So I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I'd sure like to see that be something that's just more widespread.
Well, also a lot of the times the rigging's laying around, it suffers mechanical damage from being on the
Yes.
ground. People are running over them with forklifts or running
Yes.
over them with heavy equipment. The riggers throw them. I mean, I've witnessed it on the job myself. I've seen delivery trucks running over the four-way wire rope slings, and before I can get down to the bottom on the buck hoist to say something to somebody, they're already flying materials on the building. So I walked into the superintendent's trailer and I said, "Hey, I saw a delivery truck running over your four ways." And he turns around in a meeting and goes, "Do you think it hurt him?" And I'm thinking, well, we should probably stop and inspect. If it had a rigging rack, it'd be a lot harder for them to run over the gear.
Yes.
Like you said, they're passive least resistance. I know I need the bigger strap, but this one will probably work because it's not there. Could you imagine if you showed up in any trade with all your tools in your hand and then just threw them on the ground and left them all over the job site, and then you wanted to know why your tools weren't performing right and why your guys can't find their
Right.
screwdrivers, or it's with any trade, organization is a big part of production. So,
Yes.
being able to select
I'm
the proper
stealing
gear.
that. I'm stealing that.
And I'll tell you,
That-
like when we do vehicle recovery with when I do vehicle recovery and battlefield recovery, these guys a lot of times literally have 45 minutes to clear a highway. So their organization is just unbelievable. When you open up the side of these big rotators and recovery vehicles, they literally have every shackle is inventoried in order, inch and a quarter, inch, 3/4. You know what I mean? Right down the low. They're all stacked perfectly neat. Every single chain is sitting in a piece of PVC with a working load limit. They have reference cards on the door, so when they open up the door, not only can they see the chain and the rating, it says 3/8, 20 foot, 5,800 pounds, but they have all their reference charts there. They're set up for success. And these guys continually analyze everything they do to think, how can I do it better the next time? It's not that was good enough and it worked. What can I do better? And they actually post pictures of each other's rigging, and they tear each other up pretty good. And then they call me to get in the middle. But it's a great evaluation, and it just helps people become better riggers. I love it when our riggers start arguing about how to rig something, because that's a learning process.
And that if there's one thing that anybody takes away from this today, and I hope there's a lot of things to take away, every safety person, every supervisor listening to this podcast, I hope that they would recognize a piece of rigging laying on the ground. It's not an isolated event. It's a system failure. We've got a failure in our system. We need to go back and look at making our system function better from every aspect. And that kind of moving that into the human performance, human error, and you've admitted to this, we've had this conversation before, but no matter how well trained, no matter how qualified, no matter how experienced, riggers will make mistakes. So what are the most common just human error mistakes that you see out there?
Typically, the biggest error I see in the course of my whole career is people just don't understand the angles. They just don't understand the angles and how it affects the rigging. So a lot of accidents I go to, it's just they didn't understand, once they breach that 30-degree threshold, that the load forces go up incredibly. Second to that is just application. I mean, I even deal with a lot of engineers that are extremely smart. I deal with nuclear engineers and stuff, but I'm a subject matter expert. So, compatibility of hardware has been a big one. D over D factors that a lot of people have no concept of. Circling back to what you said earlier, having that one expert on the job where somebody can reference, but if they don't even have the fundamental training to realize there's a problem, that's an issue. But I would say rigging angles is probably the biggest. And second to that would be tension factors. A lot of riggers are taught that tension, as you spread the sling out, you reduce the capacity, but sometimes they overlook the tension that's being sent back to their anchor points. And I always refer to people, what's the hardest thing about rigging? To me, it's not the angles, it's not the reduction factors or anything that we talked about. I always reference to people, we've all been to fall protection class, right? What's the hardest part of fall protection? Not the harness, right? You just have to put it on properly. Sometimes that's a good trick, but
Yeah.
put your harness on. Then you have a connection device, usually a lanyard or retractable, self-retracting lifeline.
Anchorage.
But what's the hardest part? The anchor.
Yeah.
The anchor. Yeah.
Attachment point integrity. I know what my rigging can do. People call me all the time. Hey, can you pick up 500 tons, 1,500 tons? We manufacture slings that break at 1.5 million pounds per sling. Picking something up heavy isn't the issue. It's how do I connect to the load where the load doesn't come apart? And I think there's a lot of guessing going on. I'm constantly telling people out on the GC side that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to have the guy with 20 years experience. We can ask the manufacturer of the product. So that's another thing that's been great over the last 10 years is all of a sudden I'm noticing these rental companies are supplying man lifts and generators, and they have center of gravity markers on them. You would have never saw that 10, 15 years ago.
No.
Why did these people do that? Because the GCs and the people who are running the equipment demand, where's the center of gravity? Oh, you won't tell me? Then I'll go to this rental company that will tell me. They're now starting to put arrows and indicating this is a lifting point. I used to have to call the manufacturer and get a drawing from their engineering department to determine where those are. So I think we have to demand it from the GC side, the sub side. So.
Well, I'm going to take this to even a little simpler, and you might get mad at me because I'm going to throw this. I was doing the same thing. I'm taking advantage here. Is you one time confessed to me having had your hand in a place where you could have had a serious accident and realized it at the last minute.
Right. So we were actually, it's about 6 years ago. So I have lots of experience in rigging by that time, right? So 6 years ago, I was up at a battlefield recovery, and we were lifting a striker, and the operator of the equipment, we even had an engineer out there who knows a lot about rigging, but we're literally 5 or 6, I would think, of some of the best recovery guys out there. And I just made a simple mistake, like a lot of riggers. Every time they went to lift the striker up, the shackles would fall down on the lifting points. And then when they would try to tighten back up on the rigging, they'd get jammed in a downward position. Well, I didn't communicate with the operator that I needed to push that shackle back up in the air. And right about the time I reached over there to grab it, he hit hoist up, and that shackle popped. And I just thought to myself, okay, here's the rigging trainer with all this experience, right? Mr. Know-it-all. I hope not. I just almost lost my finger. It can happen that quick. And we've had actually a pretty good bit of hand injuries over the last 2 years. I've seen quite a few hand injuries going on.
Well, we have, and that was kind of specifically where I wanted to go, is that we, again, no matter how experienced, how trained, humans are going to put their hand in the wrong place. That is going to happen. How do we minimize that, protect against that? I know you and I have had the conversation about the rigging sticks and this and that. Just any thoughts on that, on the hand injury prevention?
Obviously, it has to be put into the training. The training is critical for people. Yeah, I was just, I'm sorry. So how do we get rid of the hand injuries? I think I know where I wanted to circle back to on this, or not circle back. Philip had mentioned the fall zone. So in web sling and tie down, something that we just started implementing into the standards, and from my understanding, the ASME B30.9 committee is doing as well, is we're starting to use the term danger zone. You know, people always think of the main danger from rigging as falling, and we need to teach them the main danger for rigging is not falling. It's just being anywhere where you can get pinched, where there can be a sudden release of the load. A lot of times if we have, and it's hard to do this on a podcast, but if we have a 2-leg sling lifting a load, typically we find when we're in testing, when the rigging breaks, the load does not just fall straight down. Typically one sling is going to break on one side of the load, and then the load's going to swing. So the danger area could be actually way over here, not necessarily over here where the load could fall on you. The same thing a lot of times is we're pulling. If we're pulling, it's not a fall zone. It's an anticipated danger zone where a sudden release of tension could snap something back on somebody. In vehicle recovery, that's actually where most people get killed, is when the rigging breaks and the snatch block goes shooting back to the recovery vehicle. So I just think there needs to be more awareness, and I think we're starting to roll that out into the standard, where we're not only, you know, the fall zone, but all these danger zones where you can get pinched and hurt.
Philip, you have any follow-up on that, or?
I was again. I was taking some notes so I can steal some more things from Sam here, because he's so. I mean, he's right though. He's so right about the fall zone. We look at sometimes, a lot of people look at it as that pyramid shape below the hook, right? But just like you're saying, Sam, it could be a long distance away from there, you know, based on losing a sling or a strap breaking.
Yeah, danger zone, very important, and I'll be happy to give you some documentation on that. All the web sling and tie down information's there, and it's starting to be referenced. So I think that's a big step forward for rigging safety.
You both also mentioned ASME, and maybe Philip, you want to start on this, because I know you've had a lot of conversations with Sam about this, and that your training incorporates the ASME rather than the OSHA. You want to talk about that difference in the robustness of the standards?
Yeah, that you know, a lot of times I'll joke with people that I could teach everything OSHA says on rigging in about 15 minutes. But if you want more thorough information, the ASME standard is, you know, updated more frequently and much more thorough and even easier to understand.
Yes.
I think you know, the first thing that comes to mind is how many broken wires in a wire rope sling, and when you try to teach people the OSHA thing of 10% in any 8 diameters, and they're wrapping their head around it. But if I go look at ASME, all I gotta have to do is count, right? And that's just, I think it's easier for people to understand as well. But I'm calling Sam the expert because I'm sure he spent more time looking at it and knows more about how it's being updated. So what do you think, Sam?
I agree with everything you just said. OSHA has some basic standards out there, and you know, I think it's great to have those. But if you go into the OSHA website and you look at safe sling use and you read the statement, they basically said that they refer you to ASME or AMSI. You know, it's definitely, I consider OSHA rigging here and ASME here.
Yeah.
That's basically what governs my whole world. We call it the rigging Bible here. And the best people I know in rigging sit on the boards for ASME. So I think they're the ones driving forward the standard, and OSHA's minimum. I would definitely always lean towards ASME when it comes to rigging.
One other thing, just to kind of on the human error, human performance side of things, is that I mentioned the system, and the system drives so much behavior, but some of the system issues that I see with rigging is the production pressure leading to rushing and to maybe not getting the ideal sling for that. And fatigue being such a enormous issue in construction. And I don't think we're paying enough attention to that. Any thoughts on that?
Okay, I want to jump in on that. Yeah, and Sam, I'd love to hear your experience of this. That I wish I had $1 every time I'm talking about rigging and some subcontractor in the room. And so context is we're on one of those jobs that has a bunch of tower cranes. Okay, so there's our context. But on some multi-story building project like that, I wish I had $1 every time somebody in the class says that load is 100% the operator's responsibility the minute it comes off the ground. And, from that human error view, I think there's a lot of people that actually believe that it's their job to rig it, and then hands off, it's all his responsibility now. And I always try to communicate that it's a partnership between you and the rigger. I mean, you and the crane operator, right? You're signaling him, telling him where to go, right? And then on the human error perspective, I'll ask this question sometimes: what time did you get to the job this morning? Was the tower crane operator already here? And what time did you leave yesterday? And was the tower crane operator still here? And 99% of the time that answer is yes. And so tying in to the fatigue issue, I think a lot of times we have tower crane operators whose brains are functioning the same way a brain that drank too much alcohol that would fail a breathalyzer is functioning. But then we have people that rig loads for that operator who thinks it's 100% their responsibility and I'm hands off. And so I think changing that perception is really important, especially in our southeastern states. Some of what I just said doesn't apply where there's large union environments and they limit the hours of the tower crane operator. But down here, we'll work them to the point that if their brain's functioning like a drunk person, right? What do you think, Sam? What do you see out there?
I agree. You and I both know that those guys can be there. A good day, I would think, for a tower crane operator would probably be 10 hours. I don't think they work an 8-hour day. And there's many days they're there 14, 16 hours, and then they're called back to do a concrete pour in the middle of the night. And a lot of times they don't have backup operators. So that's why these guys, just like truck drivers, they're just pushing them too hard, too long. And then there's just human error. You're tired.
That's right.
I do know, I have a friend of mine, and that's actually his business model. He supplies tower crane operators, and the way he does it is you're not just getting one tower crane operator, you're getting all 6 of us. So if my guy gets sick or you need somebody to work a double, I can send somebody else in and swap out the seats. So you're actually buying a package rather than just one operator who's up there operating with a cold or just not feeling good. And they don't even have the option to call in sick a lot of times. They know it could cost them their job. I mean, I don't know what a GC would say if the tower operator said, I can't come in today. I don't know that that's really an option for them. So, maybe that's another concept that they should be looking into companies that can actually provide, some relief when we hit those busy production times.
That's a great suggestion, because you're right, we don't have backup, and you're right, no operator calls in sick. So that tells us right there that we have tower crane operators in major metropolitan areas swinging loads over streets that are, like Philip said, are legally drunk, or quite ill. So that's another system issue that I think we have, system failures that we need to address, along with the overall fatigue issue. Well, we are getting close up to 1 hour. Do anyone have any other thoughts on or things you'd like to mention on the rigging issue? Sam, anything?
We covered a pretty good bit. I've enjoyed it. I got to stand on my little soapbox and talk about rigging.
Yeah, we got a rant, right? And we'll do this on YouTube too, so people can watch us rant. That's great. Philip, if anything else you'd like to add to that?
So I was thinking that the whole behavior model thing before we got on here, and that our circumstance, right, that is we do have a lot of people that don't understand rigging, right? And there's reasons why it's kind of relatively new as far as 10 years old, but we talked about that. But sometimes people struggle with, okay, that's a lot of stuff I got to do. So what are some simple things that we could do right now? I think we can whittle away at these imperfections, right? One, I think just having some basic conversations about reduction factors, right? I mean, just if the distance between pick points and the hook to the pick point, if that's all the same, can we at least start there where everybody on the job knows the 60-degree triangle, right? I mean, basic stuff. Can we start getting that? Maybe that's in a toolbox topic instead of the ladder extending 3 feet above the landing. Could we get a little bit better with some of that? Could we get a little bit better at educating that it's a partnership between whoever's rigging the load and the operator, and they are highly prone for error due to the system we have, right? And so can we help them out a little bit more? Can we expect them to make a mistake and help them out a little bit more? And I think those are simple things that we can do right now to whittle away, right? Maybe we can't change the world today, but I think we can make an improvement of where we were 20 years ago for sure.
And every time we whittle away and we make one minor improvement, what we don't know is that we may have saved a life today. And that's why we all do what we do. So I want to thank you guys. Appreciate you. Appreciate everything you do and the resources that you give to us. Hope everyone has a great, wonderful Christmas holiday, and I hope 2021 is awesome.
Same
Thanks,
here.
guys.
Thank you, Pam, for everything that you do.
Appreciate it.
All right. Y'all have a good day. Bye.
Bye, guys.